Honda's exit from Formula One is very similar to the American sitcom How I Met Your Mother. They're constantly teasing us with the end, but it takes too long and everyone just gets a bit annoyed. Do you know what I mean? After powering Max Verstappen to a Drivers' Championship title in 2021, they then topped it by helping Red Bull take both titles in 2022. For the time being, they are still actually partnered with Red Bull, despite apparently not being partnered with them for about a week. The whole thing's a bit of a mess, to be honest. What we do know is that come 2026, they will have no buyers for engines, and also no plans to make an engine. Ford took their only customer. But have they found a new buyer? Is Aston Martin taking the next step towards being a top F1 team with Honda by their side? Let's check it out. Honda have flitted in and out of Formula One like a boomerang over the last 6 decades. The Japanese power unit manufacturer enjoying the highs of supreme success and the lows of gut-wrenching defeat. Their most recent 7-year stint, which technically ended in 2021, saw them endure both extremes. It began with an ill-fated reunion with McLaren in 2015, which yielded very little and led to a bitter divorce, and ended with Max Verstappen guiding a Honda-powered Red Bull to the Drivers' World title just months after Honda had announced that they would be leaving the sport. What was peculiar about Honda's last withdrawal is that not only did they quit F1 just when they'd cracked the engine formula and were finally reaping the rewards, but they left one foot in by continuing to work with Red Bull through the team's newly created Red Bull powertrains in a sort of unofficial capacity. Essentially, they continued to do the work and invest, but didn't get the plaudits for doing so. They had their reasons. The early years of pain had taken their toll on the Japanese manufacturer's board. The repeated failures, while spending 9-figure sums annually on the project, was embarrassing for them. Formula One can be lucrative, but as an engine manufacturer, it is the prestige and the technical innovation that are the real prizes. If you're losing all the time, you're going to get the opposite of prestige. A change in leadership at Honda meant F1 wasn't so high on the agenda for the top brass, and they cited the wider company's goal of carbon neutrality as a reason to divert resources away from the sport. But it is in their culture not to let anyone down, which meant they continued to support Red Bull, while the energy drinks-backed firm built up their own power unit division. In the meantime, there were some senior management at Honda who wanted to stay in F1, especially as they were now winning. In their eyes, competing in the top categories of motorsport is part of Honda's DNA. And as F1 began plans to evolve their engine formula from 2026 onwards, which included a greater focus on electrification and battery power, as well as the introduction of 100% sustainable fuel, Honda realized a lot of their ambitions synced well with those of the sport. And so, the boomerang started its curve back towards F1 once more, through the Honda Racing Corporation, or HRC brand, with HRC first taking an observer role in the 2026 regulations, and then increasing their brand exposure with Red Bull, which saw the power unit for this season renamed Honda RBPT. Honda made a mistake though. Their in-out relationship with the sport and Red Bull eventually lost them their prize partnership. They wanted to flirt with Red Bull, string them along in case they wanted the relationship in the future, but Red Bull got wooed by a bigger, richer brand, Ford. Since then, every customer team in the sport has been rumoured to partner up with Honda, and why wouldn't they want to? Partnering with Honda would be like producing your own engines, but without the investment cost of building a powertrain production factory and all the other expenses that come with it. To understand why Honda is such an attractive prospect for any team that doesn't build their own engines, I'll explain the Aston Martin and Mercedes partnership. Aston Martin buy their engines from Mercedes, and have done so since the second season of the Force India Formula One team in 2009. So Mercedes designed the perfect engine for Mercedes' car, and then sell it on at a price set by the FIA to a number of teams. The engine shape, meaning how all the parts fit together, including the gearbox and drivetrain, is decided by Mercedes. This has a big impact on how the rear of the car is put together. Since 2022 specifically, the Mercedes engine has been designed to accommodate the zero-side pod design and the rear suspension setup that Mercedes wanted to use with that design. That is why Aston Martin buy their rear suspension from Mercedes as well. This means that Aston Martin's design options are limited by Mercedes, not something an F1 designer wants, especially one as good and as inventive as Dan Fallow's. Mercedes also get the first choice of engines that come out of the factory. No F1 engine is identical. Each one has its own imperfections, meaning that when they get into the cars, one could produce 1% more power than another, or be 1% more durable. Marginal differences, but in Formula 1 that is important, and it means Aston Martin are at a disadvantage to Mercedes, even though they use the same engine. Not something Aston's owner Lawrence Stroll is going to be very happy about. And this is where the Honda and Aston Martin partnership starts to make perfect sense. For Aston Martin to make the next steps, they want an engine supplier that's going to work with their design team to package the engine in the way they want. They also want the fastest and most durable engines coming out of the factory. It isn't quite making your own engine, but it is going to be the next best thing. So how do we know that Honda and Aston Martin will be teaming up from 2026? Well, the race recently reported that several of their sources say that Honda will be back, and it will be with Aston Martin. Honda coming back is no big surprise, and Aston Martin choosing to ditch Mercedes and try to find their own engine supplier is no big surprise either. Of course, Honda could sell engines to any number of teams, but with Aston Martin getting in first, you would assume they would get some say on how the Honda engine will be constructed, and probably first dibs on the engines that come off the end of the conveyor belt, which is Aston Martin's real goal. At one stage there were reports that Aston Martin were going to start making their own engines in-house, but with all the investment into their own factory and wind tunnel happening at the moment, Lawrence Stroll probably didn't want to drop a few £100 million more. With Honda returning in 2026, the engine market is looking pretty exciting for any teams not currently committed to a supplier. Mercedes are one option. They currently supply themselves, Williams, McLaren and Aston Martin. McLaren were pretty deep into conversation with Honda over the winter. They're in the market for a new supplier for their engines, presumably in the hope of a relationship similar to the one that Aston Martin will now have with Honda. Ferrari currently sells their engines to Haas and Alfa Romeo. Haas and Ferrari are like two peas in a pod, so that relationship won't change. But come 2026, Alfa will be no more, and Audi will take their place. The German manufacturer will be producing their own engines, and will want to take on at least one customer to help offset costs. There is Renault, who power Alpine at the moment, and they'll be sticking around for 2026, so that's another option for any team on the grid looking to try a different engine. That is as long as CEO Laurent Rossi doesn't get fed up with the team messing up and just sell them. You can check out our most recent video if you want to learn more about that dumpster fire. Finally, there is Red Bull Ford, who will power both Red Bull teams. That is 6 engine suppliers, and apparently there are others interested as well. If Andretti gets the spot on the grid he so desperately wants, General Motors will probably come in as an engine supplier as well. McLaren would have a wealth of options for their engine supplier from 2026, assuming they don't team up with someone else who's interested. So the new engine regulations could bring a huge shake-up to the sport, which is very exciting. Aston Martin may have hit the jackpot if they can get officially signed up with Honda from 2026. There is the small barrier of Fernando Alonso being the most hated man in Japan, after he constantly criticised them during Honda's torrid time with McLaren. That mess of a relationship hit its lowest point when Alonso called the Honda engine a GP2 engine at Honda's home race in Japan in 2015. But Alonso will be 44 by the time that season starts, so maybe he will have finally retired by then. Do you think Aston Martin could challenge for world championships with a Honda engine? Let us know what you think of the new partnership in the comments down below, and until next time, drive safe and bye for now.